The fever had teeth. It gnawed at Vera's bones, chewed through her flesh, left her shaking so violently that her own body felt like a stranger's. She pressed one hand against the rough bark of a pine tree, the other cradling the swell of her belly where her daughter kicked weakly, as if sensing her mother's fading strength. 7 months. 7 months of hiding what grew inside her, of scrubbing pots until her knuckles bled, of pretending she was nothing more than what they believed her to be. A kitchen maid with no family, no name, no worth. The birthmark on her hip burned like a brand. She discovered its true meaning 3 weeks ago, when the old healer woman had examined her in secret, checking on the baby's position. The mark had always been there. A pale pattern she'd assumed was just an odd birthmark, barely visible against her fair skin. But under the healer's candlelight, it had seemed to glow with faint silvery luminescence. The healer's weathered face had gone pale as mountain snow. "Frostborn," she'd whispered, tracing the intricate pattern with a trembling finger. The winter rose. "Gods above, child, you carry royal blood." Vera hadn't believed her. Couldn't believe her. She was nobody. An orphan left on the manor's doorstep 18 winters ago, raised to serve, taught to be invisible. But then Lord Ashvale had summoned her to his private chambers, and the hunger in his eyes had told her everything she needed to know. He knows. He knows what I am, and he wants it. The memory clawed at her as she stumbled forward through the pre-dawn darkness, branches scratching at her arms, her thin dress already torn in a dozen places. She could still feel his hands on her shoulders, still smell the wine on his breath as he'd leaned close and whispered his intentions. "Such power sleeping in your veins, little kitchen mouse. Did you really think you could hide forever? When I mark you, when I claim that frostborn bloodline, I'll have more than just a broodmare. I'll have a weapon. Ice magic hasn't been seen in these lands for 3 generations. Imagine what I could do with it. Imagine what we could do together." She'd spat in his face. The beating that followed had been swift and brutal, his guards holding her arms while Lord Ashvale himself delivered each blow. But they'd made a mistake. They'd left her alone afterward, assuming the locked door and her broken state would be enough to contain her. They'd forgotten that desperate women with children to protect could accomplish impossible things. The window had been small. She'd been smaller. Now she walked, staggered, through territory that belonged to no one, the stretch of wild forest between Ashvale's lands and the border of the Stoneheart Kingdom. Her feet were bleeding. She couldn't feel her toes anymore. Something strange had sustained her these past 3 days, a coldness in her blood that pushed back against the fever's heat, an instinct that kept her moving when her body should have collapsed. She didn't understand it, didn't question it. The frostborn magic she didn't know she possessed was keeping her alive, burning through her reserves to get her and her child to safety. The fever painted the world in shimmering, uncertain colors, and more than once she found herself talking to her daughter, the words slipping out unbidden. "Almost there, little one. Almost safe. He won't find us. He won't touch you. I'll die first, do you understand? I'll die before I let him use you the way he wanted to use me." "But you're dying anyway," a cold voice whispered in the back of her mind. "The fever is eating you alive. You won't make it to the border. You'll collapse in these woods, and the wolves will find your bones come spring, and no one will ever know what happened to the last daughter of House Frostborn." "Shut up," she muttered, lurching forward. "Shut up, shut up, shut up." The trees began to thin. Vera's heart hammered against her ribs, from exertion, from fever, from the desperate hope that clawed at her chest like a living thing. She could see it now. The great stone arch that marked the border crossing. 2 guards standing at attention in the pale light of early morning. Stoneheart territory. The Alpha King's domain. She knew nothing about him except rumors. That he was cold as the mountain his kingdom was named for. that he'd never taken a mate despite being well past the age for it, that his justice was swift and his mercy non-existent. But he wasn't Lord Ashvale. That was enough. Please, she breathed, stumbling toward the arch. Please, please, please. The guards saw her coming. She watched their faces harden, watched disgust flicker across their features as they took in her torn dress, her swollen belly, the fever-bright wildness in her eyes. One of them stepped forward, hand dropping to the sword at his hip. Halt! State your business. Asylum. The word came out cracked, broken. I'm requesting asylum. Please, I have nowhere else to go. Borders closed to refugees. The second guard's voice dripped with contempt. We've got enough mouths to feed without adding more. Go back where you came from. I can't. Vera's knees buckled. She caught herself on the stone arch, fingernails scraping against ancient rock. Please, you don't understand. Lord Ashvale, he'll kill me. He'll take my baby. I can't go back. I can't. Lord Ashvale? The first guard laughed, a cruel sound that echoed off the stones. The Ashvale territory is 3 days' walk from here. You expect us to believe a pregnant woman in your condition made it that far on foot? I did. I swear to you I did. Please, just let me through. I'll work. I'll do anything. I have skills. I can cook. I can clean. I can... You can turn around and take your bastard somewhere else. The second guard stepped closer, his lip curling. We don't need refugee trash spreading disease in the kingdom. Look at you. You're burning up. Probably carrying plague. You think we're going to let you waltz through and infect honest citizens? Vera's vision swam. The world tilted sideways, and she felt herself falling. Felt the cold morning air rush past her face. Felt nothing. Darkness swallowed her whole. She surfaced to the sound of arguing voices, distant and distorted like they were coming through water. Her cheek was pressed against frozen ground, and somewhere nearby, someone was shouting. Found her like this, my king. She collapsed before we could... Before you could what? A new voice, deeper than the others, rough with barely contained fury. Render aid? Show basic decency? She's pregnant, for God's sake. She's clearly ill. And you left her lying in the dirt like garbage? She's a refugee, sire. The protocols clearly state... I don't give a damn about protocols. Vera forced her eyes open. The world was still spinning, but she could make out shapes. The two guards standing rigid with terror, and a third figure looming over her. Tall, broad-shouldered. Dark hair shot through with silver at the temples, though his face was young, maybe 30 winters at most. The slow aging of ancient wolf bloodlines that could stretch a single lifetime across centuries. He wore plain traveling clothes rather than royal finery, but there was no mistaking the authority in his stance, the way the guards cowered before him. Alpha King Cyrus Stoneheart, she thought dimly. He's real. He's here. He turned toward her, and their eyes met. Vera's breath stopped. He was handsome in a severe way. Sharp jaw, high cheekbones, a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. But it was his eyes that held her frozen. Gray as winter storms, gray as the stones of his kingdom, gray as the sky before snow falls. They widened as he looked at her, something flickering in their depths that she couldn't name. You're awake, he said, and his voice had changed, softer now, almost gentle. He crouched beside her, and she could smell him suddenly, cutting through the fever haze, pine and wood smoke, cold mountain air, something wilder underneath. Can you tell me your name? Vera. It came out as a whisper. Vera, Frostborn. She hadn't meant to say it. The name that wasn't supposed to be hers, the heritage she'd only just discovered. But the fever was burning through her walls, her defenses, leaving her stripped raw and honest. The king's jaw tightened. Frostborn, you're certain? The birthmark. Her hand moved weakly toward her hip. The healer said, "Winter rose." I didn't know. I didn't know until 3 weeks ago. I'm not lying. I swear. I believe you. He said it simply, without hesitation, and something in Vera's chest cracked open at the unexpected kindness. When was the last time anyone had believed her? When was the last time anyone had looked at her like she mattered? My king. One of the guards stepped forward, voice thin with anxiety. If she's truly of the Frostborn line, the political implications are mine to manage. Cyrus didn't look away from Vera's face. You two are relieved of duty. Report to Commander Steele and explain why you left a pregnant woman to die at our gates. I expect your resignations on my desk by nightfall. His voice was ice, the same cold ruthlessness that had made him legendary. And if I ever hear of either of you treating a refugee with such cruelty again, you won't be dismissed. You'll be executed. Am I understood? But sire, go. They went. Vera watched them scramble away, their boots crunching on frost-hardened ground, and then she was alone with the Alpha King of Stoneheart. He hadn't touched her yet, she realized. He was still crouched beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, but he hadn't laid a single finger on her. I'm going to carry you, he said quietly. You can't walk, and the nearest healer is inside the fortress. I need to touch you. Is that all right? Vera blinked at him, uncomprehending. Was he asking permission? Lord Ashvale had never asked permission for anything. Lord Ashvale had taken what he wanted with brutal efficiency, had treated her like property, had... Yes, she managed. It's all right. Cyrus nodded once, and then his arms were sliding beneath her, one behind her shoulders, one under her knees, and he was lifting her as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. Vera gasped as her body pressed against his chest, as the heat of him seeped through her thin dress and into her fever-chilled bones. And then the world shifted. Heat flooded through her, but not the sick heat of fever. Something else entirely. Something that started where his skin touched hers and spread outward like liquid gold, like sunlight, like the first warmth of spring after a long winter. Deep inside her, in a place she hadn't known existed, something stirred. Something stretched and yawned and opened ancient eyes. Mate. The something whispered. Mine. Ours. Mate. Cyrus froze mid-step. His whole body went rigid, his arms tightening around her, a low sound rumbling from his chest. Not quite a growl, not quite a groan. Something raw and primal that made every hair on Vera's body stand on end. She watched his eyes, those storm-gray eyes, and saw them flash brilliant gold before settling back to gray. Impossible, he breathed. Vera couldn't speak, couldn't think. She was carrying another's child. She was nobody. She was running for her life, and yet every cell in her body was screaming the same word over and over again. Mate. 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 Their eyes locked. The world narrowed down to just them, just his arms around her, just the bond thrumming between them like a plucked harp string, just this impossible recognition that neither of them could deny. We need to get you inside, Cyrus said finally, his voice rougher than before. You're burning up. The healers? I know what I felt. Vera didn't know where the words came from, only that they were true. That wasn't the fever. That was... I know. His arms tightened fractionally, pulling her closer to his chest. I know what it was. But you're ill, and you're pregnant. And right now the only thing that matters is making sure you survive the night. We can discuss the impossible after you're no longer dying in my arms. He started walking, carrying her through the great stone arch and into Stoneheart territory. Vera let her head fall against his shoulder, too exhausted to hold it up any longer. She could hear his heartbeat, strong and steady, faster than it should be. She could smell him with every breath. that intoxicating mix of pine and smoke and wild. She could feel the bond between them, delicate as spider silk, strong as forged steel. Mate, her wolf whispered again, and for the first time since she'd fled Lord Ashvale's manor, Vera allowed herself to hope. The fortress rose before them like a mountain given form and purpose, its walls hewn from the same gray stone that gave the kingdom its name. Vera watched it grow larger through fever-blurred eyes, her cheek still pressed against the warm leather of Cyrus's traveling coat, her body cradled against his chest with a gentleness that made something in her ache. Guards snapped to attention as they passed, their faces flickering with surprise and curiosity, but none dared speak. None dared question why their king carried a bedraggled, pregnant refugee in his arms like she was something precious. The bond between them pulsed with each step he took, a steady rhythm that matched his heartbeat, that seemed to echo in the hollow spaces of her chest. Vera had never felt anything like it. She'd heard stories, of course. Every wolf heard stories about the mate bond, about that instant recognition, that unbreakable connection that tied two souls together across any distance, any obstacle. But she'd never expected to feel it herself. She'd never expected to feel anything again except fear and exhaustion and the desperate, clawing need to protect her unborn child. "Stay awake," Cyrus murmured, his voice a low rumble against her ear. "Talk to me. Tell me about yourself." "There's nothing to tell." The words came out slurred, thick with fever. "I'm a kitchen maid. Was a kitchen maid. I scrubbed pots and peeled vegetables and tried to be invisible." "And the Frostborn bloodline?" Vera's laugh was bitter, broken. "I didn't know. 18 years of nothing, of being nobody. And then the healer saw my birthmark and everything changed. Lord Ashvale found out. He wanted—" She shuddered, unable to finish the sentence. "I ran. I had to run." Cyrus's arms tightened around her, and she felt his chest vibrate with another of those low, rumbling sounds. Not quite a growl, but close, possessive, protective. "You're safe now. He can't touch you here. You don't know him. You don't know what he's capable of. I know what I'm capable of." His voice was cold as the mountain winds, sharp as the edge of a blade. "And I know that anyone who tries to harm you will answer to me." The heat inside Vera's chest flared brighter, spreading through her veins like liquid fire. Her wolf. She still couldn't quite believe she had a wolf, that there was this other presence living beneath her skin, stirred and stretched, pressing against the boundaries of her consciousness with an urgency that made her gasp. "Mate," it whispered again. "He protects. He defends. He is ours." "I don't understand," Vera breathed, more to herself than to him. "I'm carrying another's child. I'm no one. Why would the bond choose—" "The bond doesn't care about circumstances." Cyrus's jaw brushed against her hair, and she felt him inhale deeply, scenting her. "It sees souls, not situations. And yours. God's above, Vera. You smell like winter roses and fresh snow. You smell like home." The world tilted. Vera's eyes slipped closed, and she felt herself falling again. Not physically, not with his arms so solid around her, but internally, tumbling into the bond that stretched between them like a golden thread. She saw flashes of something she couldn't explain. A lonely throne, a cold bed, years upon years of isolation wrapped around a heart that had forgotten how to hope. His loneliness, his pain, his desperate, secret wish for something more than duty and responsibility, and the endless weight of a crown. When she opened her eyes again, Cyrus was staring down at her with an expression she couldn't read. His gray eyes had flecks of gold in them now, glimmering like distant stars. "You felt that," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Vera nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. "I felt it too." His voice was rough, strained, like he was holding something back by sheer force of will. I felt you, Vera. Your fear. Your courage. The way you've been fighting every moment of your life just to survive. You're the strongest person I've ever met. I'm not strong. I'm terrified. Bravery isn't the absence of fear. He turned a corner, carrying her deeper into the fortress. Bravery is feeling the fear and moving forward anyway. You walked 3 days through wild territory, pregnant and fevered, because you refused to surrender. That's not weakness. That's iron will wrapped in mortal flesh. Vera felt tears prick at her eyes, hot and stinging, completely unwelcome. She hadn't cried in years, not since she'd learned that tears accomplished nothing except making her an easier target. But something about his words, about the conviction in his voice, cracked through the walls she'd built around herself. As the first tear slipped down her cheek, she noticed frost creeping across the bedpost where her hand gripped it, delicate crystals forming without her conscious thought. She jerked her hand away, startled, and the frost melted as quickly as it had appeared. Here we are. Cyrus stopped before a door of dark wood, nudging it open with his shoulder. Beyond it lay a room larger than any Vera had ever been in. A massive four-poster bed draped in furs and soft linens, a fireplace already blazing with warmth, windows that looked out over snow-capped mountains. This will be your chamber. You'll have everything you need. He carried her to the bed and laid her down with impossible gentleness, arranging pillows behind her back to support her swollen belly. Vera watched him move, watched the way his hands, large and calloused, warrior's hands, handled her like she was made of spun glass. The healers will be here shortly, he said, straightening. I've sent word ahead. They'll bring down your fever and make sure the baby is healthy. You don't have to, Vera started, but he silenced her with a look. Yes, I do. He paused, something flickering across his face. Vulnerability, quickly masked. Try to rest. I'll return when the healers have finished. He turned to leave, and Vera's hand shot out without conscious thought, her fingers closing around his wrist. The contact sent another jolt of heat through her, another surge of that golden warmth that made her wolf howl with recognition. Cyrus froze. Stay, Vera whispered, then immediately felt foolish. I'm sorry. I don't know why You must have duties. A kingdom to run. I shouldn't have. I'll stay. The words came out rough, almost hoarse. Cyrus slowly turned back, his eyes finding hers, and Vera saw the battle playing out on his face, duty warring with something deeper, something more primal. His nostrils flared as he breathed in her scent again, and she watched his eyes flash gold once more, bright as newly minted coins. I'll stay, he repeated, quieter now. He lowered himself into a chair beside the bed, his large frame somehow folding into it with unexpected grace. As long as you need me. The healers arrived within the hour, 3 women in gray robes who moved with brisk efficiency. They clucked over Vera's fever, over the cuts and bruises on her feet, over the way her body trembled with exhaustion. One of them pressed a bitter-tasting tea to her lips and made her drink every drop. Another spread a cooling salve across her forehead. The third examined her belly with gentle, knowing hands. The baby is strong, she announced, and Vera sobbed with relief. A fighter, like her mother. The fever hasn't touched her. A few days of rest and proper food, and you'll both be fine. Through it all, Cyrus watched from his chair by the bed. He didn't speak, didn't interfere, but his presence filled the room like a physical force. The healers glanced at him with barely concealed curiosity, clearly wondering why their king had taken such a personal interest in a refugee from the border. But they didn't dare ask, and Vera was grateful for that. When they finally left, promising to return in the morning, the room fell quiet. The fire crackled in the hearth. Outside the windows, snow had begun to fall, fat, lazy flakes drifting down from a gray sky. You should eat something, Cyrus said. He rose from his chair and moved to a small table near the window, where someone had laid out a tray of food: warm broth, fresh bread, sliced fruits, a pot of honey. You've been running for 3 days. Your body needs sustenance. I'm not hungry. Eat anyway. He brought the tray to the bed, setting it carefully on the mattress beside her. Your daughter needs you strong. The mention of her daughter made something twist in Vera's chest. She looked down at the swell of her belly, at the life growing inside her, and felt the familiar surge of protective love that had driven her through the forest, through the fever, through the impossible journey to this place. She's not... Vera hesitated, then forced herself to continue. The father. He's not... It wasn't... I know. Cyrus's voice was soft, devoid of judgment. I could smell the truth of it on you. The fear. The coercion. It was Ashvale, wasn't it? Before he discovered your bloodline, when you were still just a servant he thought he could use and discard. It wasn't a question. Whatever happened, it wasn't your choice. Vera's throat tightened. Most men would see me as ruined, used, carrying another's bastard. Most men are fools. He sat on the edge of the bed, keeping a careful distance between them, respecting boundaries she hadn't even known she'd drawn. I see a woman who survived something terrible and still found the strength to protect her child. I see a survivor. I see... He stopped, his jaw working. I see my mate. The word hung between them, heavy with meaning. This isn't how it's supposed to work, Vera whispered. The stories always talk about two people meeting, instant recognition, immediate claiming. But I'm broken, Cyrus. I'm carrying another man's child. I'm a refugee with nothing to offer except... Stop. The command in his voice was gentle but absolute. You're not broken. You're not damaged. And whatever you believe about your worth, you're wrong. The bond doesn't make mistakes, Vera. It chose you for me. It chose me for you. And while I won't press any claim, while I won't touch you without permission or demand anything you're not ready to give, I need you to understand something. He leaned forward, his gray eyes blazing with an intensity that made her breath catch. You are not alone anymore. You are not prey anymore. Whatever happens next, whatever you decide about us, about this bond, about your future, you are under my protection now. My kingdom is your sanctuary. My strength is your shield. And anyone who tries to hurt you will face the full wrath of an alpha king who has finally found his mate. Vera stared at him, tears streaming down her cheeks unchecked. When was the last time anyone had protected her? When was the last time anyone had seen her as something worth protecting? I don't know how to do this, she admitted, her voice cracking. I don't know how to trust. I've spent my whole life learning that trust gets you hurt. Then we'll take it slow. Cyrus picked up the bowl of broth from the tray, holding it out to her. Starting with this. Will you eat? For your daughter? If not for yourself? Vera took the bowl in trembling hands, lifting it to her lips. The broth was warm and rich, flavored with herbs she couldn't identify, and her stomach growled at the first taste. She hadn't realized how hungry she was, how empty. That's it. Cyrus's voice was approving, warm. Good. More. She drank until the bowl was empty, then accepted the bread he pressed into her hands, then the fruit, then more broth when he refilled the bowl from a pot on the tray. By the time she finished, her eyelids were drooping, her body finally giving in to the exhaustion it had been fighting for days. Sleep, Cyrus said softly. He rose from the bed, moving back to his chair. I'll be here when you wake. You don't have to stay. The words came out slurred with exhaustion. I'm safe now. You said so yourself. I know. He settled into the chair, long legs stretched out before him, gray eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that should have been frightening but somehow wasn't. "I'm staying anyway." Vera wanted to argue, but her body had other plans. Her eyes slipped closed and sleep claimed her between one breath and the next. She dreamed of ice and roses, of a great white wolf running through snow-covered forests, of golden light pouring through cracks in a frozen heart. When she woke, hours later, the room was dark except for the glow of the fire. Snow still fell outside the windows, and the world beyond seemed hushed, muffled, wrapped in winter's quiet blanket. Cyrus was still there. He sat exactly where she'd left him, his eyes closed now, his breathing deep and even. He'd fallen asleep in the chair, his head tilted back against the carved wood, one hand resting on the arm of the chair as if ready to leap to action at a moment's notice. Even in sleep he looked dangerous, all coiled power and sharp edges, a predator momentarily at rest. But there was vulnerability there too, in the slight furrow between his brows, in the way his lips parted softly with each breath, in the simple fact that he'd stayed, that he'd kept his word, that he'd watched over her like a guardian while she slept. Vera studied him in the firelight, this king who had carried her across the border himself, who had tended her fever and fed her broth with his own hands, who had promised her safety and meant it. The bond between them hummed with quiet contentment, a warmth she felt all the way to her bones. Maybe, she thought drowsily, maybe trust is something you learn. Maybe it starts with moments like this. Small kindnesses, kept promises, a stranger who becomes something more. She closed her eyes again, and this time her sleep was deep and dreamless, wrapped in the safety of his presence. The next morning brought sunlight streaming through the windows and the smell of fresh bread wafting from somewhere nearby. Vera opened her eyes to find the chair empty, a momentary panic seizing her chest before she heard movement from across the room. Cyrus stood by the window, dressed in fresh clothes, simple dark trousers and a linen shirt, nothing that marked him as a king except his bearing. He was looking out at the snow-covered mountains, his profile etched in morning light, and something about the image made Vera's heart clench. "Good morning." He turned at the sound of her stirring, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "The healers came earlier. They said your fever broke during the night, and they confirmed what I suspected. It was Frostborn magic keeping you alive those 3 days, burning through your reserves to get you and your child to safety. The fever was the cost of that power." He met her eyes with something like awe. "Your bloodline saved you, Vera. You're out of danger now." "How long was I asleep?" "Almost 14 hours. He crossed to the bed, sitting on its edge with that same careful distance as before. "You needed it. Your body has been running on nothing but fear and will for too long." Vera pushed herself upright, wincing at the stiffness in her muscles. "I should get up. There must be something I can do. I can't just lie here while you." "You can, and you will." His voice was gentle but firm. "The healer's orders are rest for at least 3 more days. Your body needs to recover, and your daughter needs you healthy. But I'm just taking up space, taking up resources. I should earn my keep somehow." "Vera." The way he said her name made her stop mid-sentence. "You don't need to earn anything. You're not a servant here. You're not a refugee to be tolerated until you're useful. You're—" He stopped, running a hand through his dark hair in a gesture of frustration. "I'm what?" she pressed. "Important," he said finally. "To me, to this kingdom, to whatever the future holds. So please, just this once, stop trying to prove your worth and let yourself be cared for." The words hit her like a physical blow. All her life, she'd measured her value in what she could do, what she could provide, how useful she could make herself. The idea of being valued simply for existing, simply for being, it was foreign, terrifying. And yet, Looking into Cyrus's gray eyes, she wanted so badly to believe it was true. I don't know how, she admitted, her voice small. Then let me teach you. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. The touch was feather light, barely there at all, but it sent electricity crackling through her veins, made her wolf rise up and press against her skin with desperate longing. Day by day, he continued, his hand dropping back to his side. Moment by moment, we'll figure this out together, Vera. I'm not going anywhere, and neither are you. A knock at the door interrupted whatever response she might have made. Cyrus straightened, his expression shifting into something more regal, more guarded. Enter. A servant appeared, a young woman with dark hair and wide, curious eyes. She bobbed a curtsy to Cyrus, then another to Vera, her gaze lingering on Vera's face with unconcealed interest. My king, the court has assembled for the morning session. Lady Bloodmoon has requested an audience regarding the guest. Something dark flickered across Cyrus's face. Lady Bloodmoon can wait. She was rather insistent, sire. She mentioned concerns about security and the need to address the, situation at the border before rumors spread. Vera felt herself shrink against the pillows. Lady Bloodmoon. She'd heard that name whispered in Lord Ashvale's manor, one of the great ladies of the Stoneheart court, a woman of ancient bloodline and considerable power. If someone like that was already raising concerns about her presence. Tell Lady Bloodmoon, Cyrus said, his voice cold enough to freeze fire, that I will address the court when I am ready and not a moment before. And you may also inform her that my guest is under my personal protection, and any concerns about her presence should be directed to me personally. The servant blanched, curtsied again, and fled. In the silence that followed, Vera found her voice. I'm causing trouble for you. No. Cyrus turned back to her, and his expression softened. The trouble existed long before you arrived. Lady Dahlia Bloodmoon has been positioning herself as my future queen for 3 years. She won't be pleased to learn that the mate bond has other plans. Maybe. Vera hesitated, then forced herself to continue. Maybe you shouldn't announce anything. About the bond, I mean. If it's going to cause political problems. I am the Alpha King of Stoneheart. His voice was quiet but unyielding. I don't hide from political problems. I solve them. And I certainly don't hide my mate. My mate. The words sent a shiver through her. He said them so easily, so naturally, like they were an immutable fact of the universe rather than something still uncertain, still forming. I should go, he said, rising from the bed. The court session can't be avoided forever, and Lady Bloodmoon will only cause more trouble if I let her suspicions fester. But I'll return this evening. We can dine together, if you're feeling up to it. I'd like that, Vera heard herself say. Cyrus paused at the door, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Rest well, Vera, and remember, you're safe here. You're wanted here. And whatever Lady Bloodmoon or anyone else might say, you belong in this castle as much as anyone. More than most. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, leaving Vera alone with her thoughts and the steady hum of the bond that stretched between them like a golden thread. The hours stretched long after Cyrus left, and Vera found herself drifting in and out of a restless sleep. Each time she woke, she reached instinctively for the bond, that golden thread humming between them, and felt a measure of peace settle over her racing heart. He was somewhere in the castle, attending to matters of state, dealing with Lady Bloodmoon's machinations, but he was there. Real. Hers. Whispered that wild part of her she was only beginning to understand. By late afternoon, Vera felt strong enough to sit up properly, to swing her legs over the side of the bed and test her weight on the cold stone floor. Her fever had broken completely, leaving behind only a faint weakness in her limbs and an insistent hunger that reminded her she was eating for two. She pressed her hand to the swell of her belly, feeling the familiar flutter of movement within. "We're safe," she murmured to the child growing inside her. "At least for now. I think we might actually be safe." A soft knock at the door made her look up. The same dark-haired servant from before entered, carrying a tray laden with covered dishes. Behind her came another woman, older, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "I'm Helga," the older woman announced without preamble. "Head of the household staff. His Majesty has asked me to see to your needs personally." Her gaze swept over Vera with clinical efficiency, taking in her borrowed nightgown, her tangled hair, the lingering pallor of her cheeks. "You look like a stiff wind would knock you over. Sit back down before you fall." Vera obeyed, too surprised to argue. "Good." Helga nodded approvingly. "At least you have sense. Some of these high-born ladies would argue just to prove they could." She gestured to the younger servant who set the tray on a small table near the window. "That's Mira. She'll be attending you specifically. Any needs you have, you tell her, and she'll see them met." Helga's tone carried a faint note of something, not quite suspicion, but wariness. "She came recommended by Lady Bloodmoon's household 3 years ago. Competent enough, though she keeps to herself more than I'd like." "Thank you," Vera managed. "I don't want to be any trouble." "Everyone's trouble." Helga's stern expression cracked slightly, something almost like warmth flickering in her eyes. "That's what we're here for. Now eat. You're thin as a rail and growing a babe. The king would have my head if I let you waste away." She swept out as efficiently as she'd entered, leaving Mira to uncover the dishes. The aroma that rose from the food made Vera's stomach clench with desperate hunger. Roasted meat, fresh bread, vegetables glistening with butter, and a pot of the same healing broth she remembered from the night before. "His Majesty asked the kitchen to prepare his own favorite dishes for you," Mira said softly, her earlier curiosity now tempered with something like respect. "He said you should have the best we can offer." Vera felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back furiously. Such a small kindness, really. Just food. But after months of eating scraps in Lord Ashvale's kitchen, of being told she was lucky to get the burned crusts and overcooked vegetables no one else wanted. "I can help you to the table," Mira offered, "if you're still weak." "No, Vera drew a steadying breath. "I can manage." "Thank you, Mira." She ate slowly, savoring each bite, feeling strength flow back into her body with every mouthful. Through the window, she could see the sprawl of the castle grounds below, manicured gardens, training yards where soldiers sparred, and beyond them, the distant shimmer of the border where she'd collapsed just days ago. It felt like a lifetime had passed since then. A lifetime since she'd been Vera, the kitchen maid. Invisible and insignificant, hiding the birthmark on her hip like a shameful secret. When the meal was finished, Mira helped her bathe and dress in a simple but well-made gown of deep blue wool. The fabric was softer than anything Vera had ever worn, and when she looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back at her. Her cheeks had more color now, her eyes less haunted. She looked almost respectable. "The king sent word," Mira said, pinning up the last of Vera's hair. "He'll dine with you here in your chambers tonight. He thought you might not be ready for the Great Hall yet." Relief flooded through Vera. The thought of facing the entire court, of enduring the stares and whispers of nobles who would see her as nothing but a pregnant refugee, made her stomach clench with anxiety. Yes, that's very thoughtful of him." The hours until evening passed in a blur of reading and resting and trying not to think too hard about what all of this meant. About the bond thrumming between her and the Alpha King, about Lady Bloodmoon's suspicious hostility, about the child she carried and what future might await them in this new place. When Cyrus finally arrived, the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and gold outside her window, and Vera was standing by the glass watching the colors paint the sky. She felt him before she heard him, a warmth blooming in her chest, the bond singing with recognition, and turned to find him in the doorway, still dressed in the formal attire he must have worn for court, but with his collar loosened and his hair slightly disheveled. "You look better," he said, his gray eyes sweeping over her with an intensity that made her skin prickle with awareness. "I feel better. The food helped. And the rest." She hesitated, then added, "I heard you sent your favorite dishes." Something flickered across his face, almost embarrassment, quickly hidden. "I wanted you to have the best. You deserve—" He stopped himself, shaking his head. "You deserve far more than I can offer, but I'm trying." Servants appeared behind him, carrying trays and dishes, transforming the small table by the window into an intimate dining arrangement for two. Candles were lit, wine was poured, and then they were alone again. The door closed firmly behind the departing staff. "How was court?" Vera asked as they settled into their seats. Cyrus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Tedious. Lady Bloodmoon spent an hour demanding answers about the security threat at the border, by which she meant you. I spent another hour reminding her that border security is the Crown's concern, not hers." He paused, something dark flickering across his face. "There was also a merchant caught smuggling weapons to Ashvale's territory. I had him executed in front of the assembled court." He said it flatly, without emotion, and Vera saw for the first time the cold king the stories described. Examples must be made, or more will follow. She must have been furious. Dahlia Bloodmoon is always furious about something. She's been positioning herself as the next queen since before my father died, and she doesn't take kindly to having her plans disrupted. He took a long drink of wine, then set the goblet down with more force than necessary. "She's dangerous, Vera, cunning and ruthless and entirely focused on her own advancement. I need you to be careful around her." A chill ran down Vera's spine, and this time, the chill was literal. She felt the cold stir in her blood, felt frost prickle at her fingertips beneath the table where Cyrus couldn't see. She remembered Lady Bloodmoon's name from Lord Ashvale's manor, whispered in tones of admiration and fear by the other servants. A woman who had clawed her way to power through strategic marriages and convenient deaths. A woman who did not tolerate obstacles. "I'll be careful," she promised. "I've assigned additional guards to this wing of the castle. Mira and Helga both report directly to me. No one will be allowed access to you without my explicit permission." He reached across the table, his large hand covering hers. The touch sent warmth spiraling through her, the bond humming with contentment. "I won't let anyone hurt you, either of you." His gaze dropped briefly to her belly, and Vera felt a complicated surge of emotion. The child she carried wasn't his. She'd been so careful not to think about that, about what it meant for this impossible bond between them. But Cyrus spoke of the baby with such easy acceptance, such genuine concern, as if it were already his to protect. "Can I ask you something?" The words came out before she could stop them. "Anything." "The baby." She swallowed hard. "You know it's not yours. You know I was with someone else before. Doesn't that bother you?" Cyrus was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing absent circles on the back of her hand. When he spoke, his voice was low and rough. "When I was 17, my father sent me to war against the Shadowfell Pack. I watched my best friend die in my arms, saw horrors that still haunt my dreams. I came back a different man than the boy who'd left." He met her eyes, and she saw old pain there, carefully controlled but never fully healed. "We all carry our pasts with us, Vera. The child you carry is part of your story, a story that led you here. To me. How could I resent that? Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. She'd braced herself for judgment, for rejection, for the same disgust she'd seen in Lord Ashvale's eyes when he'd discovered her pregnancy. But Cyrus looked at her with nothing but fierce tenderness, and it broke something open in her chest. "Come here," he murmured, pushing back from the table. She went to him without thinking, letting him pull her down onto his lap, her face pressed against the solid warmth of his chest. His arms wrapped around her, strong and sure, and she felt his lips brush the top of her head. "You're not alone anymore," he said into her hair. "Whatever comes, we face it together." That's what the bond means. That's what being mates means. She tilted her head back to look at him, and their eyes locked. The bond between them blazed like a living thing, gold and fire and something that felt terrifyingly like love. His gaze dropped to her lips, and she felt his body tense beneath her, felt the effort it cost him to hold himself back. "Vera," he said, her name rough and reverent on his tongue. "Yes?" "If I kiss you right now, I'm not sure I'll be able to stop." Her heart hammered against her ribs. Every sensible instinct she possessed screamed at her to pull back, to maintain distance, to protect herself from the devastating vulnerability of wanting someone this much. But her wolf rose up inside her, pressing against her skin with desperate longing, and the word that came out of her mouth was not the word her rational mind intended. "Then don't stop." His mouth claimed hers with a hunger that stole her breath. The kiss started gentle, exploratory, questioning, but quickly deepened into something raw and consuming. His hand fisted in her hair, tilting her head back to give him better access, and she gasped against his lips as sensation flooded through her. The bond between them roared open, and suddenly she could feel his emotions as clearly as her own. Desire, yes, but also tenderness and wonder, and a fierce, protective need that made her own wolf howl in response. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cyrus rested his forehead against hers. "That was—" "Yes," she agreed, not needing him to finish. His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "I've waited 500 years to find you. I can wait longer if you need time." "I don't want to wait." The admission shocked her, but she knew it was true. Something had shifted inside her when their lips met, some final wall crumbling to dust. She was terrified, yes, but she was also more certain of this, of him, than she'd ever been of anything in her life. A low growl rumbled through Cyrus's chest, and his eyes flashed gold. "Be sure, Vera, once you're mine, I won't let you go. I can't. I'm already yours." She pressed her hand to his chest, feeling his heart thunder beneath her palm. The bond is just the beginning." He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "What I feel for you goes beyond fate, beyond destiny. I look at you, and I see my future. Every dream I didn't dare dream, every hope I'd given up on. And I will spend the rest of my life proving myself worthy of you." She kissed him again, softer this time, sweeter, and felt the bond hum with satisfaction between them. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever Lady Bloodmoon might scheme, they would face it together. As mates, as partners, as something neither of them had ever expected to find. But even as Vera lost herself in Cyrus's embrace, somewhere in the depths of the castle, Lady Dahlia Bloodmoon was setting plans of her own in motion. Plans that would not be deterred by royal proclamations or protective guards, or the inconvenient appearance of a mate bond that threatened everything she had worked toward for 3 long years. Dahlia stood before her vanity mirror, applying powder to hide the flush of rage that stained her cheeks. Her chambers were the finest in the castle outside the royal wing, a testament to her family's ancient power and her own relentless ambition. Tapestries worth more than most nobles earned in a year hung from the walls. Jewels glittered in cases of polished oak, and on her desk, carefully sealed with her personal sigil, sat a letter addressed to Lord Ashvale of the fallen Ashvale territory. She had heard the rumors, of course, whispers among the servants about the border girl's unusual markings, about the birthmark on her hip that some of the older staff recognized from stories passed down through generations. The Frostborn line, supposedly extinct, their royal house burned to ash a century ago in the Great Purge, but bloodlines had a way of surviving against all odds, hidden and dormant, waiting for the right moment to resurface. If the refugee was truly a Frostborn heir, she possessed something infinitely more valuable than her inconvenient bond with the king. She possessed dormant power, ice magic that had once made the Frostborns the most feared rulers in the Northern Territories. Power that, in the right hands, could be used to reshape the political landscape of the entire realm. Lord Ashvale would pay handsomely for that power. He'd been searching for a way to reclaim his territory's lost glory ever since the Stoneheart conquest. If Dahlia could deliver him a Frostborn heir, especially one already carrying a child who might inherit that ancient bloodline, his gratitude would know no bounds. And if something were to happen to the refugee before she could cement her bond with Cyrus, well, accidents happened, especially to sickly women in delicate conditions. Dahlia smiled at her reflection, a cold, calculating expression that never reached her eyes. She had not spent 3 years cultivating Cyrus's court, eliminating rivals, positioning herself as the inevitable queen, only to be displaced by some border trash with an inconvenient birthmark. "Mira," she called, knowing her spy among the household staff would be waiting just outside her door. The dark-haired servant girl slipped inside, her eyes downcast with convincing meekness. Few in the castle knew that Mira's loyalties lay not with the crown or the head housekeeper, but with the Blood Moon family who had purchased her service years ago. Helga had always sensed something off about the girl, that excessive meekness, those downcast eyes that noticed too much. Just yesterday, the old housekeeper had caught Mira lingering outside Lady Bloodmoon's chambers at an odd hour, but Mira had been careful. So careful, never giving concrete cause for dismissal. What Dahlia didn't know was that Helga had already reported her suspicions to Commander Steele, the grizzled captain of the palace guard who had served 3 generations of Stoneheart kings, and he was quietly having Mira watched. "My lady, the girl, Vera, I want to know everything about her. What she eats, when she sleeps, who visits her, when she's alone. Everything." Dahlia turned from the mirror, fixing Mira with a stare that promised consequences for failure. "And I want you to ensure my letter reaches Lord Ashvale's messenger at the Border Tavern. Discreetly." Mira took the letter, tucking it into her bodice. "What should I tell Helga about my absence?" "Tell her you're running an errand for me. She knows better than to question the Blood Moon household." Dahlia waved a dismissive hand. "Now go. And Mira? Be careful around the king. He's protective of his new pet. If he suspects anything—" "He won't, my lady. I've been playing the loyal servant for 3 years. A few more weeks won't strain my performance." After Mira departed, Dahlia poured herself a glass of wine and settled into the chair by her fire. Patience had always been her greatest virtue. She had waited years for Cyrus to choose her, had endured his indifference and his cold courtesy, had smiled and schemed and slowly eliminated every other contender for his hand. There had been a time, early on, when her feelings for him had been genuine, when the young Dahlia had looked at the scarred, lonely king and felt something stir in her heart that wasn't ambition. But he had never looked at her the way he looked at that refugee girl. Never. And that rejection had curdled whatever love she'd once felt into something darker. She could wait a little longer, but not too long. The bond between the king and the refugee was strengthening by the day. Dahlia could see it in the way Cyrus looked at the girl, in the protective growl that entered his voice whenever her name was mentioned. If they mated properly, if the bond was sealed with a marking bite, Dahlia's position would become untenable. No noble would support a challenge to the queen's legitimacy once the Alpha King had claimed her so publicly. She needed to act before that happened, before the refugee became untouchable. The poison was already prepared, a slow-acting compound that would mimic the effects of a difficult pregnancy, a gradual weakening that would seem entirely natural given the girl's sickly condition upon arrival. A few drops in her food each day, and within a week or two, the problem would solve itself. The king would mourn, certainly, but he would recover. And Dahlia would be there to comfort him, to remind him that he still needed an heir, a queen, a partner worthy of his throne. It was a good plan. Careful, patient, almost impossible to trace back to its source. Dahlia raised her glass to the fire, watching the flames dance through the blood-red wine. "To the future Queen of Stoneheart," she murmured, and drank deep. 3 floors above, in the warmth of Vera's chambers, Cyrus reluctantly extracted himself from their embrace. The hour had grown late, and despite every instinct screaming at him to stay, to claim, to mark, he knew she needed rest more than she needed his hunger. "I should go," he said, the words coming out rougher than he intended. Vera's hand caught his sleeve. "Stay, just for a while longer." The plea in her eyes nearly undid him, but he thought of her fragile health, of the baby she carried, of all the reasons he needed to be patient. "If I stay, I won't be able to control myself." He pressed a kiss to her forehead, letting his lips linger against her skin. "And you need to heal, to rest. Tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" "Tomorrow I'm presenting you to the court formally, as my guest under royal protection." He paused, watching her reaction carefully. "And as the woman the bond has chosen for me." Fear flickered across her face, quickly suppressed. "Lady Bloodmoon won't like that." "Lady Bloodmoon can go to hell." His voice was savage, and he saw Vera's eyes widen. He forced himself to gentle his tone. "I'm sorry. The thought of anyone threatening you, questioning your right to be here. I understand." She reached up to touch his face, and he leaned into her palm like a starving man offered bread. "I'll be there. Whatever happens, I'll be there. That's all I ask." He caught her hand, pressing one last kiss to her fingers. "Sleep well, Vera. I'll send Mira to wake you in the morning." He didn't know, as he left her chambers and made his way back to his own rooms, that the servant he'd just mentioned was even now slipping out a side door with a letter that would set catastrophe in motion. He didn't know that the food Vera would eat tomorrow would contain the first dose of Dahlia's careful poison. He didn't know that Lord Ashvale, receiving word of his escaped prisoner's location, was already gathering his forces for a journey to the Stoneheart border. All he knew, as he lay in his empty bed and felt the bond stretch between them like a golden promise, was that he had finally found her, his mate, his future, the woman he would die to protect. He only hoped it wouldn't come to that. The first signs came 3 days after the formal presentation to court. Vera woke with a heaviness in her limbs that hadn't been there before, a sluggishness that made even lifting her head from the pillow feel like an enormous effort. She attributed it to the stress of standing before all those hostile eyes, of feeling their judgment like physical weight pressing down upon her shoulders. The nobles had been cold, their bows perfunctory at best, their whispers barely concealed behind gloved hands and painted fans. But Cyrus had stood beside her throughout, his presence a fortress of warmth and protection. And when Lady Bloodmoon had swept into the hall in a gown of deep crimson, her smile sharp as a blade's edge, Cyrus had placed his hand at the small of Vera's back and kept it there, a silent declaration that spoke louder than any words. Now, though, alone in her chambers with only Mira to attend her, Vera felt the exhaustion seeping into her bones like poison. "Because it is poison," a voice whispered in the back of her mind, but she pushed it away. She was simply tired, simply overwhelmed. The baby was growing larger each day, demanding more of her strength, and the mate bond with Cyrus was still new, still stretching and settling into place. Of course, she was exhausted. "You barely touched your breakfast, my lady," Mira observed, clearing away the tray. "Shall I bring something else? Perhaps some fruit? Or—" "No, thank you." Vera pressed a hand to her stomach, where the baby had been quiet all morning. Too quiet. "I'm just not hungry." Mira's expression flickered. Something that might have been satisfaction, quickly masked. But Vera was too tired to notice. Too tired to see the way the maid's hands trembled slightly as she gathered the dishes, the almost imperceptible smile that curved her lips as she departed. By midday, the heaviness had spread to Vera's chest, making each breath feel like she was drawing air through thick wool. She tried to rise, to walk to the window and feel the sun on her face, but her legs buckled beneath her and she collapsed back onto the bed, gasping. Something is wrong. The thought cut through the fog in her mind like a blade of ice, and with it came something else, a stirring deep in her core, a coldness that had nothing to do with illness and everything to do with power. The frost-born magic she had barely begun to understand, the ice that lived in her blood and bones, was waking. It was warning her. Vera pressed her hands to her belly, reaching for the tiny heartbeat that had become her constant companion these past months. It was there, faint, but there. And the relief that flooded through her nearly brought tears to her eyes. But something was interfering with it. Something dark and insidious that had been creeping through her system bite by bite, meal by meal. The food. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. The food she had been eating, the meals that Mira brought her each morning and evening, the tea that the maid pressed upon her with such solicitous concern, it was all poisoned. Someone was trying to kill her slowly, carefully, in a way that would look like nothing more than the natural weakness of a sickly refugee's body. And she had a very good idea who. The cold inside her surged, and frost began to spread across her palms, delicate, crystalline patterns that glittered in the afternoon light. Vera stared at her hands, watching the ice form and grow, feeling the power that had lain dormant in her bloodline for generations finally, fully, awake. She was Vera Frostborn, the last of her line, and she would not die in shadows, murdered by a jealous woman too cowardly to face her openly. With an effort that cost her nearly everything she had left, Vera pushed herself upright. The room swayed around her, but she gritted her teeth and forced herself to stand, to place one foot in front of the other, to make her way toward the door. She needed to find Cyrus, needed to expose what had been done to her before the poison finished its work, but she didn't get far. The door swung open before she reached it, and Mira entered with another tray, her face set in that mask of servile concern that Vera now recognized for the lie it was. Behind her came Lady Bloodmoon herself, clearly here to personally verify that her poison was working, to witness Vera's deterioration with her own satisfied eyes before reporting back to Lord Ashvale that the prize he sought would soon be weak enough to claim, resplendent in a gown of midnight blue, her lips curved in a smile that didn't reach her cold, calculating eyes. "Leaving so soon, dear?" Dahlia asked, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "But you look so unwell. Surely you should rest." "I know what you've been doing." Vera's voice came out stronger than she expected, the ice in her blood lending her strength. "The poison, the letters to Lord Ashvale, I know everything." Something dangerous flashed in Dahlia's eyes, but her smile never wavered. "Poison? Letters? My dear girl, I think your fever has made you delirious. Perhaps you should lie down before you say something you'll regret." "The only thing I regret is not seeing it sooner." Vera took a step forward, and frost crackled beneath her feet, spreading across the floor in delicate, deadly patterns. You've been planning this from the moment I arrived, plotting to eliminate me so you could have Cyrus for yourself. Dahlia's composure cracked, just slightly. Her eyes widened at the ice spreading from Vera's feet, at the power that was now openly manifesting around the pregnant refugee she had dismissed as nobody, nothing, barely worth her attention. "You're Frostborn," she breathed. "The birthmark, it's true. You're really—" "The last of my line?" "Yes." Vera felt the cold building in her core, felt it responding to her fear and her fury, and her desperate need to protect herself and her child. "And you made a very serious mistake, Lady Bloodmoon. You tried to kill me. You tried to kill my baby. And now everyone is going to know exactly what kind of monster hides behind your pretty face." "Mira." Dahlia's voice had gone sharp, commanding. "Restrain her. The poison should have weakened her enough." But Vera was done being weak. Done being the victim. Done letting others determine her fate. She raised her hands, and the cold that had been building inside her erupted outward in a wave of crystalline fury. Ice shot across the floor, up the walls, coating everything in frost that glittered like diamonds in the afternoon light. Mira screamed and stumbled backward, her feet slipping on the frozen floor. Dahlia tried to run, but the ice caught her ankles, holding her in place with bonds that no amount of struggling could break. "You will face the court," Vera said, and her voice had changed, deeper now, resonant with power that she hadn't known she possessed. "You will confess what you've done, and you will pay for every drop of poison you fed me, every moment of suffering you inflicted on an innocent child." "You can't do this." Dahlia's mask had shattered completely now, revealing the ugly desperation beneath. "You're nobody, a refugee, a whore, a—" "I am Vera of House Frostborn." The words rang through the frozen room like a bell. "I am the mate of the Alpha King of Stoneheart, and I will not be murdered in shadows." She felt Cyrus before she saw him, the bond between them flaring with alarm and fury and a desperate need that pulled at her very soul. The door crashed open, and there he was, his eyes blazing gold, a snarl tearing from his throat as he took in the frozen tableau before him. "Vera!" His voice was rough with fear, with rage, with an emotion too deep to name. "What happened? Are you—" "She poisoned me." Vera's voice was steady, despite the exhaustion threatening to drag her under. "For 3 days, she's been feeding me poison through the food Mira brought, and she's been writing to Lord Ashvale, telling him where to find me." Cyrus went very, very still. When he spoke again, his voice was barely human, more growl than words, more wolf than man. "Is this true?" Dahlia's face had gone pale as the frost that imprisoned her. "Cyrus, please, you must understand. I did it for us. For the kingdom. She's not worthy of you. She's just a refugee with a bastard in her belly. That bastard is innocent." Cyrus stalked toward her, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop further, though whether from Vera's ice or his fury, no one could say. "That woman is my mate, and you dared to poison her. You dared to threaten her life, and the life of her child. She's nothing. I've waited 3 years for you to choose me, 3 years of patience and planning, and it was all for nothing." Cyrus stopped before her, close enough that she could see the gold bleeding through his gray eyes, the wolf rising just beneath his skin. "Because I never would have chosen you, Dahlia. Not in 3 years, not in 30, not in 300. There is something in you that I have always sensed, something cold and cruel and calculating, and I was a fool to let you stay at my court for so long. You can't banish me." Dahlia's voice had risen to a near shriek. "My family has served the Stoneheart crown for generations. My blood is— Your blood is worthless." Vera stepped forward, and the court nobles who had gathered in the doorway gasped at the sight of her, pale and trembling but ablaze with power, frost still crackling from her fingertips. "Your name is worthless. Everything you thought made you worthy of a crown is worthless, Lady Bloodmoon. Because you have no honor, no loyalty, no love. She raised her hand, and a single ice crystal formed in her palm. Perfect, beautiful, cold as death. This is the same poison you used on me. I can feel it in my blood, can taste its signature in the frost my magic creates. Show them. Cyrus, show the court what she tried to hide. Cyrus took the crystal from her palm, careful not to let it touch his bare skin. He held it up to the light, and even from across the room, the gathered nobles could see the dark threads woven through its heart, the poison that had been slowly, carefully killing their king's mate. Lady Dahlia Bloodmoon. Cyrus's voice rang through the frozen chamber, formal now, final. You are guilty of attempted murder of a member of the royal household. You are guilty of conspiracy with a foreign lord against the interests of the Stoneheart Kingdom. You are guilty of treason. Dahlia screamed, but no one moved to help her. Even Mira had gone silent, cowering in the corner, all her false servility stripped away to reveal nothing but fear. The penalty for these crimes is death, Cyrus continued. But my mate has asked for mercy, and I will grant it, not for your sake, but for hers. You are hereby stripped of your name, your title, and your lands. You will be exiled to the wastes, there to live out your days in whatever misery fate decrees. And if you ever set foot in Stoneheart territory again, if you ever come within 100 miles of my mate or her child, I will tear out your throat myself. Guards moved forward to take custody of the frozen prisoner, but Dahlia wasn't finished. Even now, even defeated and disgraced, she hurled her hatred at them like a weapon. She'll never be one of us. She's a refugee, a nobody, She is my mate. Cyrus's voice was soft now, but it carried through the room like thunder. She is my future queen, and you are nothing. The doors closed on Dahlia's screams, cutting them off mid-shriek, and Vera felt the last of her strength drain away. She swayed, and Cyrus was there instantly, catching her in arms that trembled with the force of his emotion. "The poison," she whispered. "The baby. I'll send for healers, the best in the kingdom." He pressed his lips to her forehead, her cheeks, her lips, desperate kisses that spoke of fear and relief, and love too profound for words. "You're safe now. You're both safe. I won't let anyone hurt you ever again." "I know." Vera reached up to touch his face, tracing the sharp lines of his cheekbones, the strong curve of his jaw. "I always knew. From the moment you carried me across that border, I knew you would protect me." The healers came, and the poison was purged from her system. Painfully, painstakingly, but completely. The baby's heartbeat grew strong again, a steady rhythm that filled Vera with joy so profound it brought tears to her eyes. And through it all, Cyrus never left her side. He held her hand while she cried, stroked her hair while she slept, fed her broth with his own hands when she woke. "You need to rest," he murmured, a week after Dahlia's banishment. They had fallen into a new ritual these past days, dinner together in her chambers, followed by hours of quiet conversation by the fire, his hand often finding hers across the table. The healers had finally declared her fully recovered from the poison, her frost-born magic having helped purge the last traces from her system. But Cyrus still hovered, still worried, and tonight, something had shifted between them. A new tension in the air, a weight to the silences, the way his gaze lingered on her lips when she spoke. "Stop trying to sit up," the healer said. "I'm fine." Vera caught his hand, bringing it to her lips. "Better than fine, strong. My magic. It saved me, Cyrus. It saved both of us." "I know." His eyes were soft as he looked at her, no trace of the fearsome Alpha King who had sentenced Dahlia to exile. Only the man who loved her, the wolf who had found his mate at last. "I felt it through the bond. The moment you used your power, I felt it like fire in my blood." It woke up because of you. Vera pulled him closer and he came willingly, settling onto the bed beside her with a gentleness that made her heart ache. Because I finally had something worth fighting for, someone to protect. Vera. His voice had gone rough, his eyes darkening with an emotion she recognized all too well. I need, I want, I know. She tilted her head, baring the curve of her neck where it met her shoulder, the spot that had been aching for days, calling out for something she was finally ready to give. I want it too. I want you to claim me, Cyrus. I want to be yours. Completely. Forever. He groaned, the sound torn from somewhere deep in his chest. His fingers trembled as they traced the line of her throat, following the path his lips would soon take. Are you sure? After everything that's happened? After the poison and the fear and... I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Vera reached up to cup his face, forcing him to meet her eyes. You are my mate. You have been since the moment you touched me at that border. And I am done waiting for the world to give me permission to be happy. The kiss that followed was unlike any they had shared before. It was fire and ice, passion and tenderness, a claiming that was as much spiritual as physical. Cyrus's hands roamed her body with reverent hunger, learning every curve, every hollow, every place that made her gasp and arch against him. Vera. He breathed against her skin, and the word was a prayer, a promise, a plea. My mate, my love, my queen. Yours, she whispered back. Always yours. His teeth grazed the junction of her neck and shoulder, the exact spot that had been calling out for this moment since their bond first snapped into place. Vera felt the pressure of his canines against her skin, the barely leashed power in his jaw, and she tilted her head further, offering herself completely. Please, she breathed, claim me, make me yours. The bite came like lightning, sharp, sudden, and utterly transformative. Pain exploded through her, bright and blinding, but almost immediately it began to change. The agony softened, melted, transformed into a pleasure so intense it bordered on transcendent. She felt the bond between them blow wide open, felt his emotions pouring into her like a river bursting its dam. Love, deeper than oceans. Devotion, stronger than stone. Loneliness, centuries of it, finally ended. Joy, so profound it brought tears to both their eyes. And beneath it all, a fierce, protective, all-consuming need that made her feel more precious than she had ever felt in her entire life. Mine, Cyrus growled against her skin, his tongue soothing the bite that would now mark her forever. My heart, my future, my everything. But Vera wasn't finished. She reached for him, pulling his head down, exposing the vulnerable curve where his neck met his shoulder. He went still beneath her hands, barely breathing, and she saw the question in his gold-washed eyes. Mutual, she whispered. We claim each other. Equals, partners, mates in truth. The sound he made was broken, beautiful, barely human. He tilted his head, baring his throat to her in a gesture of submission that the Alpha King of Stoneheart had never offered to anyone in his 500 years of life. Vera bit down. The bond roared to completion. A circle finally closed and she felt everything. His centuries of loneliness, his desperate hope when he'd felt their bond snap into place, his terror during those 3 days of poison when he'd felt her growing weaker through the bond, a gradual dimming he'd attributed to exhaustion from her ordeal, never suspecting the true cause until it was almost too late. She felt his love for her child, not his by blood, but his by choice, by will, by the fierce protective instinct that had claimed the baby as surely as it had claimed her. Yours, he gasped as she released him, as her tongue traced the bite that would mark him as hers forever. now and always, until the stars burn out and the mountains crumble to dust. They held each other as the bond settled, as the wildfire of claiming gentled into a steady, eternal warmth. Vera could feel him now, always, a presence at the edge of her consciousness, a golden thread that would connect them across any distance, through any danger. "I love you," she said, and the words felt inadequate, too small to contain the enormity of what she felt. But she said them anyway, because they were true. "I love you, Cyrus, my mate, my king, my home." "I love you," he answered, and his voice was wrecked, ruined, more beautiful than anything she had ever heard. "I have loved you since the moment I saw you lying in the snow, dying and defiant and more beautiful than the moon. I will love you until I draw my last breath, and beyond." The month that followed was the happiest of Vera's life. She grew stronger each day, her frostborn magic settling into her bones like an old friend finally returned. The baby moved and kicked and grew, and Cyrus spoke to her belly each night, telling their daughter stories of the Stoneheart Mountains, of the wolves who had ruled here for generations, of the mother who would teach her to wield ice, and the father who would love her with everything he had. Word came that Lord Ashvale had arrived at the border with 50 soldiers, only to find 300 Stoneheart wolves waiting, with Cyrus himself at their head. Vera wasn't there, but Cyrus told her about it later. How Ashvale's face had gone pale when he saw the force arrayed against him, how his voice had trembled when Cyrus informed him that any claim he had on Vera, or on the child he had forced upon her, was forfeit. "Come for what's mine again," Cyrus had told him, "and I won't stop at your army. I'll burn your manor to the foundation stones and salt the earth where it stood." Ashvale had retreated without a word, and within the month, his own pack had overthrown him. Word spreading of his cowardice at the border, of his crimes against the frostborn air. The threat he had posed evaporated like morning mist, and Vera felt the last of her fear drain away. Mira was stripped of her position and banished alongside her mistress, sent to the wastes to serve the woman she had conspired with. Old Helga had wept when she heard, not from grief, but from vindication. Her suspicions had been right all along, and Commander Steele's surveillance had helped piece together the full conspiracy. The other servants, horrified to learn how close they had come to losing their king's mate, redoubled their devotion, and Vera found herself surrounded by loyalty and love in a way she had never experienced before. The months that followed were filled with preparation, not just for the coronation, but for the child who would arrive soon after. Vera learned the workings of the court, trained with the castle mages to understand her frostborn abilities, and slowly won over the nobles who had once whispered refugee behind their hands. By the time the coronation took place on the first day of spring, when the snows had melted from the mountains and wildflowers bloomed across the castle grounds, she had already proven herself a dozen times over. Vera stood before the assembled court in a gown of silver and white, ice crystals woven into her hair, the mating mark on her neck displayed proudly for all to see. "I present to you Vera Stoneheart," Cyrus proclaimed, his voice ringing through the great hall. "Formerly of House Frostborn, Luna Queen of the Stoneheart territories, and mate to your Alpha King. Any who would challenge her right to stand beside me may speak now." The silence that followed was absolute. The nobles who had whispered refugee and trash lowered their eyes in shame. The ones who had welcomed her bowed their heads in respect. And Vera stood tall, one hand on her swelling belly, the other clasped in her mate's, and felt the rightness of it settle into her soul. 2 weeks later, she gave birth. The labor was long and difficult, but Cyrus never left her side, holding her hand through every contraction, telling her she was strong, she was beautiful, she was doing so well. And when the baby finally emerged, a girl, perfect and pink and wailing with the full force of her tiny lungs. Vera saw tears streaming down her mate's face. "She's perfect," he breathed, cradling the infant in arms that had conquered kingdoms and destroyed enemies. "She's absolutely perfect." "She's ours," Vera whispered, reaching up to touch her daughter's cheek. "Yours and mine." "Mine," Cyrus agreed, and there was no hesitation in his voice, no qualification. "My daughter, my heir, my family." They named her Aurora for the northern lights that had danced across the sky the night she was born. And as Vera watched her mate rock their daughter to sleep, as she felt the bond between them humming with contentment and love, she knew that every moment of suffering had been worth it. The border where she had collapsed, where she had nearly died in the snow, now bore a stone monument that travelers could see from miles away. Carved into its face were the words Cyrus had decreed: "All who seek refuge find home." And Vera, looking out her window at the mountains of her new kingdom, at the mate who loved her and the daughter they had made together, finally understood what home really meant. It meant this, all of this, forever.